The young heir lived in a large, beautiful house on the edge of the city, surrounded by tall walls, neatly trimmed gardens, and the quiet hum of a peaceful neighborhood. To anyone looking from the outside, life seemed perfect for the boy. He had everything he could ask for, his own room filled with toys and books, delicious meals prepared by the best cooks, and clothes that were always clean and new. But despite all of this, he often felt a little lonely. His father, a successful businessman, spent most of his time in meetings and faraway offices, while his mother was gentle but often busy with social gatherings and charity events. The young heir's days were mostly spent wandering the corridors of the mansion, imagining adventures that took him far from the quiet luxury of home. On this particular morning, the sun shone warmly through the windows, casting long golden streaks across the polished floors. Birds chirped outside, and everything seemed calm, almost unreal in its serenity. The boy wandered into the garden, watching the roses sway lightly in the breeze and listening to the distant hum of the city. He had grown up in this calm, orderly world, and it was all he had ever known. He had friends at school, but none who shared the stories and adventures he imagined in his head. Life for him was safe and predictable, but in the back of his mind, he felt an unspoken worry, a feeling that things were not as secure as they appeared. That day, as he walked through the garden, he noticed his father's car parked unusually far from the house, and for the first time, the boy felt a flicker of unease. He remembered that his father had returned late the previous night, looking tired and troubled, which was strange because the man usually came home with a calm, confident smile. The young heir tried to shake off the worry, telling himself that it was probably nothing, but his intuition, sharp for a boy his age, whispered that something had changed. Inside the house, the servants went about their daily routines with quiet efficiency, dusting, cooking, and polishing, their movements practiced and precise. The boy watched them silently, feeling a strange contrast between the calm of the house and the storm he sensed was approaching. He imagined the life outside the walls of his home, busy streets, unknown dangers, and people who had to fight every day just to survive. He thought about how different it was from his own life, and a small curiosity grew inside him. He wondered what it would be like to face real challenges, the kind that could test courage and skill, not just imagination. As the morning passed, the boy sat near the grand fountain in the center of the garden, tossing small pebbles into the water and watching the ripples spread. It was a simple activity, but it gave him time to think. He thought about his father's achievements, the business empire he had built from nothing, and the respect he commanded in the city. The young heir admired him deeply, but he also sensed that his father carried secrets, decisions and problems hidden from the world, behind the calm surface of the household. For the first time, the boy began to feel that he might have a role to play in these hidden matters, though he didn't yet understand what that role would be. Later that afternoon, a slight breeze carried the distant sounds of the city into the garden. Street vendors shouted their wares, children played in the alleys, and the young heir listened carefully, feeling a strange connection to a world he had never known. It was as if the calm of his home was just a fragile bubble, and beyond it, life was unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. He realized that no matter how safe and perfect his life seemed, there were forces he could not control, forces that could suddenly intrude and change everything. As evening approached, the sky turned a soft shade of orange, and shadows stretched long across the floors and gardens. The young heir felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Something deep inside told him that the calm would not last, that soon he would be forced to confront challenges far greater than any he had imagined. But for now, he sat quietly by the fountain, enjoying the last moments of peace, unaware of how drastically his life was about to change. He only knew that his father, the man he admired more than anyone else, might soon need his help in ways the boy had never anticipated. And so, the young heir watched the sun set over the quiet streets, feeling the tension of a hidden storm gathering beyond the walls of his safe and orderly world, completely unaware that the moment of adventure, danger, and courage was approaching faster than he could ever imagine. The calm of the young heir's life was shattered one late afternoon when his father returned home looking different from usual. The man who usually carried himself with confidence and calm now seemed tense, moving quickly through the grand hallways, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to follow him. The boy noticed the slight furrow in his father's brow and the unusual stiffness in his movements. Something was wrong, and he could feel it deep in his chest, a warning that danger had arrived quietly, yet unmistakably. That evening, the boy tried to speak to his father about his day at school, but his questions were met with short, distracted answers. The young heir felt a strange heaviness in the air, a weight he had never experienced before in the safety of his home. He could see the worry in his father's eyes, the kind of worry that was rarely shared, hidden behind polite smiles and polite conversations. It was the kind of worry that whispered secrets of trouble and danger, and the boy sensed instinctively that this time, it was serious. Later that night, the young heir overheard a conversation he wasn't meant to hear. From the shadows near the staircase, he listened as two men spoke in hushed but urgent tones. They were discussing threats, money, and decisions that could ruin a family. The words were fragmented, but the boy understood enough. Someone wanted his father gone, or at least forced into a corner he couldn't escape. Fear surged in his chest, but alongside it came a strange spark of determination. The young heir realized that for the first time in his life, he might need to step out of his comfortable world and act, even if he didn't yet know how. The next morning, the household was tense. Servants whispered quietly in the kitchen, and the usually orderly mansion seemed charged with unease. The young heir watched his father pace in the study, flipping through papers with trembling hands. His mother tried to maintain calm, but the worry in her eyes betrayed the severity of the situation. Every sound, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of the street below, even the ticking of the grand clock, seemed louder, sharper, as if the house itself was on edge. Determined to understand the threat, the young heir began observing more closely. He noticed subtle changes, unfamiliar cars parked outside, strangers lingering near the gates, and sudden, hurried visits from people he had never seen before. It was as if invisible fingers were reaching into his world, trying to pull everything he loved into chaos. He realized that the calm he had taken for granted was fragile, and now he had a front-row seat to the storm building outside the walls of his home. By mid-afternoon, his father received a call that sent a shiver down the boy's spine. The man's face drained of color, and his hands gripped the phone tightly as he spoke. Though the young heir couldn't hear the words clearly, the tone alone, urgent, worried, and tense, was enough to tell him that the danger was real, immediate, and life-threatening. For the first time, the boy felt powerless, a feeling entirely new and frightening. Yet, this fear was tinged with a growing sense of responsibility. He knew that he could not just sit by and watch, he had to do something, even if he didn't know what that something was yet. That night, sleep eluded him. He lay awake in his room, listening to the distant sounds of the city and imagining the dangers his father might face. Each passing hour made the threat feel closer, sharper, and more real. He thought about the street kid from the neighborhood, a boy who lived a life completely different from his own, navigating danger and hardship every day. Perhaps, he thought, this street kid might hold the key to facing the danger that now loomed over his family. The young heir felt a strange mixture of fear and resolve. The world he had known, safe, predictable, and calm, was gone. In its place was uncertainty, danger, and a test of courage he had never imagined. He realized that the quiet streets, the tall walls of his mansion, and the comforts of his life could no longer protect him or his father. The threat had arrived, and with it came the need for bravery, cleverness, and unlikely alliances. By dawn, the young heir made a decision. He would not stand by while his father's life was at risk. He would seek help, reach beyond his sheltered world, and do whatever it took to face the danger, no matter how unfamiliar or frightening it might be. The calm had ended, replaced by the urgent, unpredictable storm of real life, and the boy felt both fear and excitement at the adventure that awaited him, unaware that the choices he made in the next few hours would change everything. The young heir knew he couldn't face the danger alone. The thought of his father in peril weighed heavily on his small shoulders, and yet, he felt unsure where to begin. His home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. He needed someone who understood the streets, someone who could move through the shadows where he could not. And then he remembered the street kid, a boy from the neighborhood whose life was the opposite of his own. The street kid was known in the alleys for his quick thinking, clever hands, and fearless nature. He could slip past guards, hide in plain sight, and disappear when anyone tried to follow him. Unlike the young heir, he had no walls to protect him, no wealth to shield him, and no adults to make decisions for him. Danger was his companion, and survival was his teacher. The young heir had often watched him from afar, curious but cautious, never imagining that this boy would one day be the key to saving his family. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city's rooftops, the young heir found the street kid leaning against a crumbling wall, whittling a piece of wood with a small, sharp knife. The alley smelled of damp bricks and smoke, a stark contrast to the polished floors and scented gardens of the mansion. Taking a deep breath, the heir approached, trying to appear calm, though his heart raced like a drum. "I need your help," he said, his voice steady despite the fear knotting in his chest. The street kid looked up, eyes sharp and suspicious. He had learned not to trust easily, especially those from the other side of the city, those who wore clean clothes and spoke polite words. "Why should I help you?" he asked, leaning back on his heels. "What's it worth to me?" His tone was blunt, but the young heir saw a flicker of curiosity behind the guarded expression. "My father, he's in danger," the heir said urgently. "People want to hurt him. I don't know what to do. I can't do this alone." He paused, studying the boy's reaction. "Please. I don't know who else to turn to." For a long moment, the street kid was silent, weighing the words, reading the fear and sincerity in the heir's eyes. Finally, he nodded, not with a smile, but with a sense of decision that carried the weight of experience. "All right," he said. "I'll help. But you have to listen to me, and you have to do exactly as I say. One wrong move, and it could be worse for everyone." The young heir nodded, relief flooding through him like sunlight breaking through clouds. He realized that this boy, rough around the edges and hardened by life, was more capable in this world of danger than he had ever imagined. Together, they began to plan, sitting on the steps of the alley, mapping the streets, noting the guards, the entrances, and every possible way to reach his father without raising suspicion. As they worked, the young heir noticed how different the street kid's perspective was. He thought in terms of movement, timing, and improvisation. Every obstacle was an opportunity, every risk a challenge to be outsmarted. The heir had lived his life in order and rules, but now he was learning to think in shadows and whispers, guided by this unexpected mentor who had survived the streets through cunning and courage. That night, they rehearsed the plan quietly. The young heir carried messages, watched for changes in the street patterns, and followed instructions that felt strange and daring. The street kid moved like a shadow, teaching the heir to blend into the environment, to notice what adults overlooked, and to act quickly without hesitation. It was a world entirely new to the heir, dangerous yet exhilarating. By the early hours of dawn, the young heir felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. He realized that the street kid had not only agreed to help but had also awakened something inside him, a sense of bravery, a willingness to step into the unknown, and a commitment to protecting his family at any cost. The boy who had once wandered alone through the safe corridors of his mansion now walked beside a fearless ally, ready to face challenges that neither of them could fully predict. For the first time, the young heir understood that courage did not come from walls, wealth, or comfort. It came from action, trust, and the willingness to face danger head-on. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he felt a flicker of hope. With the street kid by his side, he might just stand a chance to save his father, and perhaps discover a world of courage, friendship, and adventure he had never known existed. The young heir and the street kid spent the next day hidden away in the quiet corners of the city, studying the mansion and the streets around it. What had seemed simple in thought, saving a father, was now a puzzle of timing, obstacles, and danger. The young heir had never noticed the small details before, the way the guards walked in pairs, the timing of deliveries, and the blind spots in the security cameras. The street kid pointed them all out, his eyes sharp, moving from one clue to another with the instinct of someone who had survived the streets by noticing everything. "See that?" the street kid whispered, crouched behind a crate near the mansion's back gate. "That guard always checks the mailbox at 3. That's your window. You have 30 seconds before he's back." The heir nodded, absorbing every instruction. It was a strange, thrilling sensation to plan something so serious, something that could change everything in a single moment. He felt a surge of adrenaline that made his heartbeat pound in his chest. They sketched out every step, from the moment they left the street kid's hiding place to the exact room where his father was likely being held, or would be targeted. Every corner, every shadow, every staircase had to be accounted for. The young heir, who had once spent hours lost in books or games, now spent hours imagining escape routes, secret passages, and ways to communicate silently. He was learning a new kind of strategy, one that relied not on wealth or comfort, but on speed, observation, and courage. The street kid taught him subtle skills, how to move without making a sound, how to signal silently, and how to blend into shadows even in broad daylight. The heir tried again and again, fumbling, tripping, and whispering apologies as the street kid corrected him. "Patience," the street kid said. "One mistake, and we lose everything. You need to move like a shadow, not like a statue." Each practice made the young heir sharper, more aware, and slowly, he began to feel that he could do this. But planning wasn't only about movement, it was about anticipation. They imagined every possible problem. What if a guard noticed them too soon? What if the father was moved to another location? What if the threat was bigger than they expected? The young heir realized that the world outside his mansion was unpredictable and harsh. The street kid, hardened by survival, reassured him with calm confidence. "We can't control everything," he said. "We control what we can: timing, stealth, and knowing our exits. Everything else, we adapt." Even as they focused on the practical, the young heir couldn't ignore the emotional weight. His father's life rested in their hands, and the responsibility was immense. He had never felt such fear mixed with determination. The street kid, noticing his hesitation, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You care. That's why this will work. Fear isn't weakness, it's fuel." The heir nodded, understanding that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was acting despite it. That evening, they added the final touches to the plan. They memorized the layout of the mansion, the number of guards, the schedules, and the routes to approach. They even made signals for each other, a whistle, a hand gesture, or a shadow movement that would communicate when it was safe to move or when danger approached. The young heir felt a strange excitement he had never known before, a mix of fear, anticipation, and the thrill of preparing for something that mattered more than games, more than comfort, more than his quiet life had ever offered. As night fell, the city seemed different. The streets were quieter, but every sound, the distant rumble of a cart, the clatter of shutters, even the whisper of wind, felt sharper, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The young heir lay awake, going over every detail, repeating the plan in his mind. He imagined his father waiting, the danger closing in, and the street kid by his side. Each repetition strengthened his resolve, sharpening his courage. By the first light of dawn, the plan was ready. They knew every step, every risk, every obstacle. What had once seemed impossible now felt like a challenge they could face together. The young heir understood that the coming hours would test not only his courage but his trust, his quick thinking, and the bond he was forming with the street kid. For the first time, he felt ready to step out of his safe world and into the storm that was coming. The night was darker than usual, thick clouds hiding the moon, casting long shadows over the quiet streets. The young heir and the street kid crouched behind a low wall near the mansion, their eyes scanning every movement. It was time for the first attempt, and though they had rehearsed countless times, nothing could fully prepare them for the real thing. The air was heavy, filled with the scent of rain and distant smoke, as if the city itself knew that something dangerous was about to unfold. The young heir's heart raced, hammering against his chest. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, even the whisper of his own breathing. He glanced at the street kid, whose calm demeanor was both reassuring and unnerving. The boy's eyes were sharp, scanning the shadows with practiced precision, every movement controlled, silent, and deliberate. "Remember," the street kid whispered, "we move slow, quiet, and together. One mistake and it's over." The young heir nodded, gripping the strap of his bag, feeling the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his small shoulders. They moved from shadow to shadow, inching toward the mansion's back gate. The guards were where they had observed them, but real life was never exactly like rehearsal. One guard lingered longer than expected, his footsteps echoing, sending a jolt of panic through the young heir. He froze, feeling a cold sweat trickle down his neck, but the street kid's hand on his arm reminded him to stay calm. Slowly, they crept past, timing each step with the rhythm of the guard's patrol. Once inside the courtyard, the young heir's senses heightened. Every door, window, and shutter became a potential obstacle. They moved with cat-like precision, the young heir following every instruction, trying not to make a sound. His mind raced with thoughts of his father. What if they were too late? What if something went wrong? The fear clawed at him, but he forced it down, letting determination take its place. The first hurdle came sooner than expected. A creaking gate that had seemed sturdy during their rehearsal gave a sudden groan as they pushed it open. The sound echoed through the courtyard, and the young heir froze, imagining every possible consequence. But the street kid acted instantly, pressing a finger to the boy's lips and leading him into a narrow shadow between the garden and the wall. The guard had heard the noise but dismissed it as the wind. The heir's chest heaved, and adrenaline surged through his body. He realized for the first time that danger was unpredictable, and even the best plans could be tested in a heartbeat. They reached the inner corridors, where the young heir had never dared to venture before. The mansion that had once been a place of comfort now felt like a maze of tension, each step carrying them closer to both the father and the unknown dangers awaiting. The young heir followed the street kid's lead, learning to trust instinct over certainty. Every whisper, every shadow, every heartbeat became a guide. The boy discovered a part of himself he had never known, a courage born of necessity, sharp and unyielding. Finally, they reached the study, the room where the father was likely to be. A single guard stood by the door, his figure partially obscured by the dim light. The street kid motioned for the young heir to stay back, and in a blur of motion, he distracted the guard, slipping silently past him. The heir watched, astonished and terrified, as the street kid used skill and cunning to create a small opening. It was a glimpse of the street kid's world, a place where danger was constant, and survival depended on every quick decision. The young heir took his chance, creeping into the room just behind the street kid. They were close now, so close that he could almost feel his father's presence, and yet, the risk of being discovered hung over them like a storm cloud. The first attempt had brought them this far, testing their courage and resolve, showing them the reality of danger. It had also revealed weaknesses they could not ignore, small missteps, unpredictable obstacles, and the ever-present threat of failure. As they paused in the shadows, catching their breath, the young heir realized something profound. Fear was no longer a weakness, it was a guide, sharpening his senses and making him alert in ways he had never experienced. The street kid's calm and experience had carried them this far, but it was his own courage, determination, and willingness to step into the unknown that had brought him to the edge of hope. The first attempt had been only a beginning, a trial that taught them both that courage was tested not in thought, but in action. And as they melted back into the shadows, ready to regroup and plan the next move, the young heir understood that the road ahead would be even more dangerous, that every step would require trust, skill, and courage, but he also knew that he would face it, no matter what, because his father's life depended on it. The young heir and the street kid thought they had prepared for every possibility, but as they moved deeper into the mansion, reality proved far more unpredictable than their careful planning. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and every creaking floorboard or distant cough made the heir's heart leap. The mansion, once a symbol of safety and wealth, had become a labyrinth of secrets and danger. What they hadn't anticipated, he realized, was that danger could take the form of betrayal as easily as brute force. They had almost reached the father's study when a sudden sound froze them in place. The young heir held his breath, listening. Footsteps, soft, deliberate, but unmistakable, approached from behind. A figure emerged from the corner of the hallway, and to the young heir's shock, it was a family friend he had trusted, a man who had visited often, always smiling and polite. But tonight, the man's eyes were cold, calculating, and there was a subtle tension in his shoulders that spoke volumes. He wasn't supposed to be here. The street kid signaled the young heir to stay silent, and the boy crouched low, pressing against the shadowed wall. The friend passed them, speaking briefly into a phone, unaware of their presence. The words they overheard sent a chill down the young heir's spine. The father's life was at risk not just because of strangers, but because of someone who had known and observed their family for years. The betrayal cut deeper than the fear of the unknown. It was personal, and it made the danger sharper, more real. As they crept forward, another twist awaited them. The father's study was not as they had expected. Doors that were supposed to be locked were open, papers scattered across the floor as if someone had searched in a hurry. The young heir's chest tightened with fear. Had they arrived too late? Had the enemy already found him? Every instinct screamed for them to turn back, but the street kid pressed forward, whispering encouragement and pointing to a hidden passage partially concealed behind a curtain. The young heir followed, feeling both fear and awe. The mansion was revealing secrets he had never known existed, hidden corridors, forgotten rooms, and narrow staircases that led to unknown parts of the estate. It was a reminder that the world was rarely as it seemed, and even the safest places could hide danger, opportunity, or both. He realized that courage alone was not enough. Observation, quick thinking, and adaptability were just as critical. The twists did not end there. As they moved through the hidden passage, they stumbled upon evidence of the plot against the father, letters, plans, and threats carefully concealed. The heir's heart pounded as he pieced together the larger picture. The danger was not random, it was calculated, and it involved people they had trusted. The realization was terrifying, but it also fueled a determination in the young heir that he hadn't felt before. This was bigger than fear, this was about protecting the family he loved, and he could not fail. Suddenly, a noise from the next room jolted them. They froze, listening as a shadow moved across the doorway. It was one of the guards, patrolling the mansion differently than expected. The street kid pulled the young heir behind a stack of crates, whispering instructions. "Follow my lead. Count every step. Don't panic." The young heir did exactly as told, holding his breath and focusing on every detail, realizing that every choice, every movement, could change everything. By the time they reached a vantage point overlooking the father's study, the young heir was exhausted but sharper, more aware of danger and betrayal than ever before. The twists of the night had tested them, revealed hidden truths, and forced the boy to grow in courage and perception. The father's life was still at risk, but the young heir now understood that survival required more than just planning. It required adaptation, trust in allies, and the courage to face what could not be predicted. As they paused to regroup, the street kid looked at him with a mixture of respect and reassurance. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Nothing goes as planned. You've seen that tonight. But if we stick to the plan, stay alert, and trust each other, we still have a chance." The young heir nodded, feeling a strange mixture of fear, excitement, and resolve. The unexpected twists had made the danger real, tangible, and urgent, but they had also made him braver, sharper, and ready for whatever came next. The night pressed on, shadows shifting, secrets unraveling, and the young heir realized that the path to saving his father would not be straightforward. There would be challenges, betrayals, and surprises, but for the first time, he felt truly alive, ready to face the storm that had been quietly gathering since the first hint of danger. The night had reached its darkest hour, the city streets silent, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The young heir and the street kid crouched behind a crumbling wall near the mansion's east wing, hearts pounding, muscles tense, every nerve alive with anticipation. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for, rehearsing in shadowed corners and whispered plans. Everything depended on this rescue. Through the faint glow of the moonlight, the young heir could see the study's windows, the place where his father was being kept, or so he hoped. Every step toward that room carried the weight of fear and determination, the weight of a life he could not afford to lose. The street kid motioned for silence, eyes scanning for patrols, shadows, and unexpected movement. "We move fast, precise, and together," he whispered. "No hesitation. One mistake, and it's over." The first obstacle appeared immediately, a guard pacing near the doorway, more alert than they had anticipated. The young heir froze, panic threatening to take over, but the street kid grabbed his arm, steadying him. With a swift, calculated motion, the street kid distracted the guard, tossing a small rock to the far side of the courtyard. The sound echoed softly, drawing the guard's attention away from the doorway. The heir followed, heart racing, silent but aware that every second counted. They reached the study door, and the young heir's breath caught in his throat. Inside, he could see his father, bound to a chair, eyes wide with fear but bright with recognition as they entered the room. Relief surged in the boy's chest, but it was quickly replaced by adrenaline, because the danger was far from over. Another figure emerged from the shadows, one of the men responsible for the threat, a tall, imposing man who had been lurking unnoticed, ready to strike. The street kid acted instantly, slipping between the man and the father with the speed of someone who had lived his entire life on the edge. The young heir followed, his small hands fumbling at the ropes that bound his father, but the street kid whispered instructions with calm authority, guiding him. "Pull hard. Quick. Don't stop." The heir obeyed, his fear transformed into focus, every movement precise, every heartbeat synchronized with the urgency of the moment. The tall man lunged, but the street kid was faster, grabbing a nearby candlestick and swinging it to distract him. The heir's father struggled against his bonds, panic mixing with hope, and together they freed him, working as a silent, coordinated team. The mansion, once familiar and safe, had transformed into a battlefield of shadows, fear, and necessity. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of movement could betray them, but they moved as one, a combination of courage, skill, and desperate determination. Once the father was free, the street kid led the way to a hidden passage, the same one they had discovered during planning. The young heir stayed close, supporting his father and scanning for danger. Their escape was not easy, another guard blocked their path, a sudden threat that had not been anticipated. But the street kid was unflinching, signaling the young heir to follow his lead. With quick thinking and a combination of distraction and speed, they evaded the guard, slipping into the shadows, hearts racing, breaths shallow, but moving steadily toward freedom. As they emerged from the hidden passage into the quiet streets, the young heir felt a strange mixture of relief, exhaustion, and exhilaration. His father was safe, the danger had been faced, and the courage that had seemed so foreign a few nights ago now felt natural, embedded deep within him. He looked at the street kid, who simply nodded, calm but proud, a silent acknowledgement of what they had accomplished together. The father, finally able to speak, wrapped his arms around his son, eyes filled with tears of gratitude and disbelief. You saved me," he whispered, voice shaking, pride and fear entwined. The young heir nodded, feeling the truth of the words, not just for his father, but for himself. He had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and emerged stronger, braver, and more aware of the world beyond the walls of his mansion. That night, as they disappeared into the safety of the city streets, the young heir understood something he would never forget: courage was not measured by size, wealth, or comfort. It was measured by action, by the willingness to face the storm, and by the trust forged in moments of extreme danger. The storm had passed, but its lessons would stay with him forever, shaping the boy who had once wandered safe corridors into someone who could face the world with eyes wide open and heart unshakable. The first light of dawn broke over the city, casting soft golden rays on streets still damp from the night's hidden rain. The young heir walked beside his father and the street kid, each step echoing softly against the cobblestones. For the first time in days, the city felt calm, not the fragile calm of safety behind high walls, but the quiet certainty of survival after a storm. The boy's chest was still heavy from adrenaline, but his mind was clearer, filled with thoughts he had never had before. As they reached the mansion gates, the father paused, looking at his son with eyes that were both grateful and astonished. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice shaking. "You were brave, more than I ever imagined." The young heir met his father's gaze, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. It was not just bravery he had discovered, it was resilience, courage, and the understanding that life beyond comfort required action, not just imagination. The street kid, leaning casually against the gate, smiled faintly. He had seen fear, struggle, and survival every day of his life, but even he recognized the change in the young heir. The boy who had wandered safe hallways, lost in toys and stories, had transformed into someone who could act under pressure, think clearly in danger, and trust both himself and others in ways that wealth and privilege could never teach. It was a subtle change, quiet but profound, visible in the way he carried himself, in the steadiness of his gaze, and in the confidence now evident in his movements. Inside the mansion, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but nothing was exactly the same. The father, now aware of the dangers he had faced, spent more time with his family, listening, teaching, and sharing stories he had once kept to himself. He looked at his son differently, not just as a boy, but as someone capable of thought, courage, and action. The young heir, in turn, understood that respect and love were not merely given, they were earned, through trust, courage, and the willingness to face fear. In the following days, the young heir found himself drawn to the city streets he had once only observed from a distance. He visited the street kids' neighborhood, learning more about the lives he had never known, lives full of struggle, resilience, and unexpected heroism. He realized that bravery existed in many forms, not just in wealth, power, or education, but in everyday acts of survival, kindness, and courage. The street kid had been his teacher, showing him that courage was practical, active, and sometimes dangerous, but always necessary. The young heir's perspective on life began to shift. He noticed the small details he had once overlooked, the way people helped each other in subtle, quiet ways, the unspoken rules of the streets, the strength required to survive without safety nets. He understood that his sheltered life had been a gift, yes, but it had also limited him. Now, he felt a responsibility not only to protect his family but also to understand the world beyond his walls, to see it clearly, and to act with both courage and compassion. One evening, as the sun set in warm shades of orange and pink, the young heir sat with his father and the street kid in the garden. The father spoke of lessons learned, of trust, and of humility. The street kid, surprisingly quiet, simply watched the young heir with a knowing look, as if acknowledging the transformation that had occurred. The heir realized that he had not only saved his father, he had saved a part of himself as well, the part capable of courage, empathy, and action in the face of fear. The mansion, once merely a place of comfort, now felt like a symbol of growth, a place where fear had met courage, and where ordinary moments had been transformed into extraordinary lessons. The young heir had faced danger, betrayal, and uncertainty, and he had emerged changed. He had learned that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it, that trust could be earned in unexpected places, and that even a sheltered boy could rise to meet challenges far greater than he had ever imagined. As night fell over the city, the young heir stood in the garden, looking at the stars above. The world felt larger, sharper, and more alive than ever before. He thought of the street kid, his father, and the storm they had survived together. And in that quiet moment, he understood that change was not something imposed from outside, it was something discovered, tested, and forged through courage, loyalty, and the choices made in the most critical moments of life.